Now we move on to key point number 4. The topic is proteins. Proteins and amino acids. Let's start out with nomenclature of proteins. The smallest unit or component of a protein is an amino acid. That's a single amino acid unit. Dipeptide, again, let's break that word apart. Di stands for 2. You've got 2 amino acids bound together, and that's what makes a dipeptide. A tripeptide is 3 amino acids bound together. Polypeptide, as the name would imply, is many amino acids bound together, which we usually define as somewhere between 10 and 100. When it's more than 100 amino acids bound together in a strand, that creates the name of a protein. Let's look again at the chemist's view of this last macronutrient, amino acids. An amino acid has 4 things in common, all of them do. They all have an amino group, which is a nitrogen and 2 hydrogens. They all have an acid group, just like our fatty acids did, with the carbon, 2 oxygens, and a hydrogen. They all have 1 hydrogen attached to that central carbon, and they all have a side, what we call R group, attached to the central carbon. It's that R group that gives the personality or the name to that amino acid. The other 3 components are the same on every amino acid. So let's look at a picture of this. As you can see here, we have the amino group, the nitrogen. We have our single hydrogen, and then over here we have our acid group, all bound to this central carbon. Over here in this empty box is what we call our R group. Whatever gets put there gives the personality to this amino acid, or the name. Here's some examples. We have glycine. Hydrogen is what is that R group and gives it its personality. Alanine has a methyl group as its personality. Aspartic acid has this group, and phenylalanine this one. These are some examples of amino acids, and as you go through, of course, each one has a slightly different structure. Just be familiar with the basic components that make up an amino acid, because again, that has everything to do with how we digest and absorb that amino acid, how those amino acids function in cooking, etc. What makes a protein shape also has a lot to do with that chemical structure. And the shape of the protein determines its function. The R group is what gives the difference between one shape or another on an amino acid. If it's charged, then it's hydrophilic, meaning that it likes water and it's attracted to water. If it's neutral, then it's repelled by water, or it's hydrophobic. Here's a kind of rough drawing of a strand of amino acids, and you'll see that the positive and the negative charges neighbor each other. But as this amino acid strand goes, it bends and it curves, and what causes those bending and curving again is the R group and how it interacts with another R group. Here they bound together, so that brings those 2 strands folding right next to each other. Here's a sulfur-sulfur bond that also, again, brings those strands folding around and curving together. When we break down a protein or denature that protein, what we're simply doing is we're unfolding the structure or the shape. It changes the shape of the protein, and consider it just kind of opening up the structure. There's different ways we can denature or break down a protein. One is by heat. We see this all the time. If you take an egg and you crack it and you go to fry an egg, it starts out clear, right? But as we cook it, it turns into a white color. What's happening when it's changing color is you're denaturing that protein. You're changing the structural shape of it. As you do that, in a particular instance of egg white protein, you're opening up that structure, and there's some biotin and iron that would otherwise be buried in the curling structure of the protein, When you denature it, you open it up and you make those available for our body to absorb. That happens in a lot of different types of amino acid structures when we cook or we denature it. Acid is another way to denature protein, and probably the most straightforward example in our food supply would be something like ceviche, if you've ever had that. It's a shrimp, and the way you prepare it, you take the raw shrimp and you add usually lemon juice, or you could add lime juice, and it's the acid of that juice that denatures the shrimp and it cooks it somewhat. Heavy metals is another method of denaturing protein. Now this is one of the dangers of us ingesting heavy metals, is that our GI tract is made up of protein. It's a muscle. All muscle is made up of protein. We don't want to denature our GI tract. That's painful, and it would, of course, destroy it. So, as a first aid remedy, one of the things that they will do is have someone drink milk. Sometimes people have a misconception that drinking the milk is to coat the GI tract. It's not really for that reason. It's so that the heavy metal will hopefully work on the proteins in the milk and denature those mostly instead of the GI tract, and reduce the amount of damage that occurs. What are some functions of proteins? There are so many different types of proteins. One of them is enzymes. Enzymes are protein catalysts. They help a reaction take place. How do they do that? By holding two substrates close together long enough so that reaction can occur, and creating the right environment for that reaction. And then that enzyme leaves the scene unchanged. So they're a catalyst in either building up or breaking down certain compounds. Proteins in our body help with water balance. Water balance is a very complex idea to understand medically. But in general, when the proteins are not in the right tissue spaces in our body, the water also does not stay in the right tissue spaces. So you have symptoms of edema. This might happen in someone who's malnourished. When we see that big belly, sometimes on the malnourished children that you might see at the checkout stand, and they're asking for money to donate to Africa, they typically have that picture of the emaciated child with a big puffy belly. That's kwashiorkor, and that puffiness of the belly takes place because of the water balance being out of whack. They don't have enough proteins in their body, so the water is flowing into the wrong spaces, and it causes edema, and that's what makes the belly be large. Hormones are also proteins. Hormones are agents that are made in one place in the body, and then they travel through the blood to act in another part of the body. Insulin is a hormone, glucagon is a hormone, and of course we know the sex hormones like testosterone. Those are proteins. Proteins also act to transport certain nutrients like glucose or sodium and potassium. Lipids, we talked about the lipoproteins. We need protein available for that transport of fat in the body. Iron, hemoglobin would be an example of the protein that carries iron. Visual pigments are proteins. An example would be opsin. Fibrin, which is involved in blood clotting, is a protein. Also collagen, which offers the connective tissue in our body with our nails and our teeth, our gums. Protein also acts as a buffer to establish or maintain that acid-base balance in the body. Also, antibodies are proteins. So you can imagine if we have a protein deficiency, we don't have enough protein that we're taking in, these are some of the areas that are going to fail. Our immune system, for instance, might start failing because we don't have enough antibodies available. And our body is smart enough to use up the proteins in an order of priority. It knows which ones are the more important ones to sustain daily life. For instance, the heart muscle is integral to surviving day to day. So when you're short on protein in your diet for a prolonged period of time, Your body is not going to try to break down the protein from the heart tissue at first. At first it's going to go for peripheral proteins like antibodies, or it might take the hemoglobin from the blood. It might cut down on the carrying of the fats away from the liver. Those are the proteins that the body will utilize first. When it no longer has enough proteins from those sources, then yes, it will break down other muscle tissues in the body like the heart tissue. PCM is short for protein calorie malnutrition. This is a condition that takes place when there's not enough protein available in the diet and also not enough calories. PCM is most prevalent in the developing countries like Africa, Central America, South America, and Southeast Asia. But we do have PCM in the United States. Typical populations that we might see it here is the homeless or alcoholics who typically might drink their meals versus eating food, elderly people, small children, or hospitalized people. There's two categories of PCM that we are going to talk about. Kwashiorkor, which is primarily a protein deficiency. They may have adequate calories available to them. In some countries they use rice water or rice milk, which might give them some carbohydrate and some calories, but it would be lacking in adequate quality protein. We call Kwashiorkor a disease of weaning. And if you think through that, why they might call it that, weaning is when someone is breastfeeding, you've got a small child, and the next baby is born. When that next baby is born, then that child that was breastfeeding needs to be weaned from the mother so that the new baby can then breastfeed. And while they're breastfeeding, the body has an amazing ability to provide adequate protein for the baby through the breast milk. How does it do that? Well, it basically steals from the mother's body stores. So if the mom isn't taking in enough protein orally, then the body will collect those proteins somewhere from within her body and still produce adequate protein in the milk. But when the baby weans and goes to a regular diet, they tend to have the disease come up with Kwashiorkor if they're in a situation where food is not available. Symptoms or marked characteristics of Kwashiorkor would be the swollen abdomen that I spoke of, also a fatty liver. And again, if we think through the process of what's happening when there is not enough protein available to the body, the reason a fatty liver arises is because the body doesn't have the proteins to create the carrier protein to take fat away from the liver and deliver it throughout the body. The lipoproteins we're deficient in because we don't have enough protein to make them. Therefore, the fat just stays right there at the liver and creates the condition of a fatty liver. Also, the body proteins that are broken down sometimes become the antibodies. We break those down for energy or for other tissue regeneration in the body, so we don't have a strong immune system. Those antibodies aren't available. What happens then, many times, it's this spiral down effect where the immune system is compromised because of the PCM, and then they're maybe exposed to water supplies that are less than adequate as far as being free of bacteria. So they drink the water with the higher bacteria load and they end up with something called dysentery. And many times that's what will cause the death from PCM, is that they'll get an infection that they're just unable to fight. Marasmus, on the other hand, is when both calories and protein are not available. It would be more of a skin and bones appearance that the child or the person might have if they're suffering from this type of PCM. This can cause impaired brain development, and the difficulty with this condition is that the child may never catch up. So even if we were to intervene on a one-year-old child and start to give them good nutrition at that point, we may have difficulty having them recoup the development that they should have had during that first year. The lack of fat availability to the brain for proper brain development, We just can't go back on that and replace that and bring back the tissues that would have developed otherwise. What about protein excess? We can get too much protein, and we hit some of the symptoms, and this is more of what we might face in our culture in America, is too much protein. Most Americans get more than 2 times what they need to be taking in. We might experience kidney or liver hypertrophy, which means enlargement. It also, we know, promotes calcium excretion, so someone might be suffering from more of a deficiency in calcium because of the fact that they're taking in too much animal protein. It increases urination, therefore may cause dehydration, and this is one of the things that causes the immediate weight loss when people go on a high protein diet, low carbohydrate diet. The excess protein in the diet causes them to urinate out more water. Why is that happening? Because if you remember that nitrogen group on the protein, when we're breaking down excess protein, meaning that we can't use that protein to rebuild other protein tissues in the body, then we're going to take that protein and we're going to break it down and either store it as energy or use it elsewhere, convert it to some form of glucose. So we have to get rid of that nitrogen group, right? Because there's no place for nitrogen on a glucose molecule. So we get rid of it by making urea and urinating it out. And that causes a dehydrated state. When we lose all that extra water, we lose weight. Also, if someone's following a high protein diet, it's likely that they're consuming less fruits, vegetables, and grains, which are good carbohydrate sources. The danger with that is that there are certain nutrients exclusive to fruits and vegetables and grains that we can't get from those rich protein source types of foods. So it's important for people to stress balance, just look at the big picture of what their goals are